The dense jungle was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. The sun was slowly setting, casting long shadows through the trees. Deep in the heart of this wilderness, a man named Raj was walking carefully, his eyes scanning the ground. He was a wildlife researcher, passionate about protecting animals. As he moved through the undergrowth, he suddenly heard a faint cry. It was weak, almost like a soft whimper. He stopped, listening carefully. The sound was coming from behind a thick bush. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, pushing aside the branches. What he saw made his breath catch. Lying there, covered in dust and leaves, was a tiny tiger cub. Its eyes were barely open, and its small body trembled. It looked helpless, lost, and in desperate need of help. Raj knelt down, his hands shaking slightly as he reached out. The cub flinched at first but was too weak to resist. Its ribs were visible under its thin fur, and Raj could tell it hadn't eaten in a while. He quickly scanned the area, looking for any sign of its mother, but there was nothing. The jungle was eerily quiet. He knew that a mother tiger would never leave her cub alone unless something terrible had happened. His mind raced. Should he leave the cub and hope the mother returned, or should he take it with him? He couldn't bear the thought of it dying alone. Making up his mind, he carefully lifted the cub into his arms. It let out a tiny cry, its body warm against his chest. He wrapped it in his scarf and held it close, whispering softly, "You'll be okay, little one, I promise." As Raj carried the cub back to his small camp on the edge of the jungle, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Tigers were fiercely protective of their young. If the mother was nearby, she would never allow him to take her cub. Had she been injured? Or worse, had poachers taken her? The thought made him uneasy. He knew the dangers of interfering with nature, but he couldn't leave the cub to die. His heart told him he was doing the right thing. When he reached his tent, he quickly made a soft bed out of an old blanket and gently placed the cub on it. He warmed some milk over the fire and used a small cloth to feed the weak little creature. As the cub drank, its tiny paws gripped his fingers, as if holding on to life itself. Raj smiled, feeling a strange connection forming between them. That night, as the jungle hummed with the sounds of the wild, Raj sat by the fire, watching over the cub. He knew he had made a big decision, one that could change everything. The cub had found safety with him, but deep down he knew the real challenge was yet to come. Because somewhere in the darkness, a mother tiger was searching for her lost baby. And when she found out what had happened, no one could predict what she would do next. The night was calm, but Raj couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He sat near the fire, listening to the distant sounds of the jungle. The cub was now asleep, curled up in the blanket, its tiny chest rising and falling. Raj sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had rescued animals before, but this was different. This was a tiger, a creature born to roam free, not to be cared for by a human. He glanced at the cub, feeling torn. If the mother was still out there, she would be searching for her baby. But what if she was injured or worse? He had seen signs of poachers in the area before. If they had taken her, the cub had no chance of survival alone. Raj decided that at first light, he would search for any signs of the mother. If she was alive, he would return the cub. If not, he would have to find a way to care for it. As the first light of dawn touched the treetops, Raj packed some supplies and gently picked up the cub. It let out a small whimper, but quickly settled in his arms. He walked carefully through the jungle, retracing his steps to where he had found the cub. Every few minutes, he stopped and listened, hoping to hear the sound of a mother tiger calling for her baby. But the jungle remained still. His heart sank. If the mother had been nearby, she would have come by now. As he moved forward, he suddenly noticed something: deep claw marks on the bark of a tree. He stepped closer, examining them. They were fresh. His pulse quickened. This was a tiger's mark, a warning, a claim to territory. Could it be the mother? Was she closer than he had thought? Raj felt a strange mix of fear and hope. If the mother was still alive, she would be dangerous, especially if she thought he was a threat to her cub. He placed the cub down gently on the ground and took a step back, watching closely. The cub let out a small cry, its weak voice carrying through the trees. Silence followed. Then suddenly, a deep, low growl rumbled through the jungle. Raj's breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted around, searching the dense foliage. The growl grew louder, more threatening. And then emerging from the shadows, golden eyes locked onto him. The mother tiger had arrived. She was massive, her muscles rippling beneath her striped coat. Her eyes burned with fury, and Raj knew he had only seconds to act. If she thought he was a danger to her cub, she wouldn't hesitate to attack. He slowly raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. The cub let out another tiny cry, and the mother's gaze flicked toward it. For a moment, everything was still. Then with a sudden movement, she lunged forward. Raj's heart pounded as the mother tiger lunged toward him. He braced himself, expecting the worst. But at the last moment, she skidded to a stop just inches away. Her piercing golden eyes locked onto his, filled with raw intensity. Her ears were pinned back, her powerful body tense with fury and fear. Raj stood frozen, barely breathing. He knew that any sudden movement could trigger an attack. But then, the cub let out a weak cry, shifting slightly in the grass. The mother's gaze snapped to her baby, and in that instant, something changed. She took a slow step forward, sniffing the air, her tail flicking anxiously. Raj knew he had to act fast. Keeping his movements slow and steady, he stepped back, creating space between them. The mother tiger let out a deep, guttural sound, half growl, half whimper. It wasn't just anger, it was pain. She had been searching for her cub, fearing the worst. Now she was finally seeing her baby again, but a human was standing between them. Raj took another careful step back, lowering his hands. "Go on," he whispered softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "He's yours." The tiger hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. With one massive paw, she gently nudged the cub. The tiny creature blinked up at her, letting out a faint noise. Then without hesitation, the cub pressed itself against its mother's warm fur. Raj exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. The mother nuzzled her baby, her tense posture relaxing just slightly. But then, just as Raj thought it was over, she lifted her head and fixed her gaze back on him. A shiver ran down his spine. She was still watching him, still deciding what to do. She had her cub back, but would she let him walk away? Raj knew he had done the right thing, but wild animals didn't see kindness the way humans did. To her, he was still a stranger who had touched her baby. The jungle was silent, the air thick with tension. Then to his shock, the tiger did something unexpected. She took another step toward him, not in attack, but in something almost like acknowledgement. She sniffed the air near him, her massive head tilting slightly. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, and in them, Raj saw something he never expected: understanding. It was as if, in her own way, she recognized that he had saved her cub. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the mother tiger turned. With her cub safely by her side, she disappeared into the thick jungle. Raj stood there for a long moment, his heart still racing. He had been inches from death, yet he had also witnessed something incredible. The raw, untamed bond between a mother and her child, the fragile moment of trust between man and beast. He knew he would never forget this day. He had stepped into the world of the wild, and for just a moment it had accepted him. Raj remained still for a long time, his eyes fixed on the spot where the mother tiger and her cub had disappeared. The jungle had returned to its usual rhythm, the distant calls of birds and rustling leaves filling the air once more. But something inside him had shifted. He had spent years studying wildlife, observing animals from a distance, but never before had he felt this kind of connection. He had looked into the eyes of a wild tiger, and for a fleeting moment understood its emotions, its fear, its love, its gratitude. As he finally turned to leave, he felt an overwhelming sense of respect for the creatures that lived in this untamed world. As he walked back toward his campsite, his mind raced with questions. Would the mother tiger be able to protect her cub? Had she been injured? The claw marks he had seen earlier suggested that something had happened, but he would never know for sure. He reminded himself that nature had its own way of balancing things. The cub was back with its mother, and that was all that mattered. Still, Raj felt a responsibility. He decided he would keep an eye on the area for a few more days, making sure no poachers were nearby. The thought of the cub being taken by hunters made his stomach turn. He had done his part, But he wasn't ready to walk away completely. That night, as he sat by the fire, his mind replayed the events of the day. He had been so close to danger, yet he had never felt more alive. He stared at the flames, lost in thought. Could animals really understand human intentions? Had the tiger recognized that he was not a threat? He had always believed that wild creatures acted only on instinct, yet today had shown him something different. A part of him wished he could see them again, just to know they were safe. But he knew that was unlikely. Tigers were elusive, masters of the jungle. If the mother didn't want to be seen, no human ever would. As the fire crackled and the jungle whispered around him, Raj made a silent promise to himself. He would dedicate his life even more deeply to protecting these creatures. He had always loved animals, but today, that love had turned into something stronger. An unbreakable bond, a sense of duty. He had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into a world few people ever got to see, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure that world remained untouched, wild, and free. The next morning, Raj woke up early, his mind still lingering on the previous day's events. The jungle was alive with morning sounds, the distant calls of birds, the rustling of leaves as small creatures scurried about. He stretched and took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. Today he had one goal, to ensure that the mother tiger and her cub were truly safe. He packed a small bag with water and some food, then set off in the direction where he had last seen them. His steps were careful, his senses alert. He knew the jungle well, but today, every shadow felt heavier, every sound more significant. He wasn't sure if he was looking for reassurance or simply hoping for another glimpse of the magnificent creatures. As he moved deeper into the wilderness, he noticed something that made him pause. Fresh paw prints in the soft earth. His heart skipped a beat. The prints were large, unmistakably those of the mother tiger, but beside them, much smaller ones followed closely. His chest tightened with emotion. They were still together. He crouched down, touching the prints lightly. The weight distribution told him that the mother was walking normally. No signs of injury. That was a relief. He followed the tracks for a short while until they led him to a riverbank. There he saw clear signs that the mother and cub had rested here. The flattened grass, the faint imprint of a small body curled up close to a larger one. It was all there. Raj smiled to himself. They were safe, and that was all that mattered. Just as he was about to turn back, a sudden noise made him freeze. A deep, familiar growl echoed through the trees. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly he turned his head, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. And then, just for a brief moment, he saw her. The mother tiger stood on a rock a short distance away, her golden eyes locked onto him once more. She wasn't growling in aggression this time. It was different, almost as if she was making her presence known. Beside her, the tiny cub peeked out from behind her legs, blinking curiously. Raj didn't move, didn't even breathe. He knew this was a moment he would never get again, a moment of unspoken understanding between two worlds. Then, just as silently as she had appeared, the tiger turned and disappeared into the jungle, her cub following closely behind. Raj stood there for a long time, his heart full. He had come here looking for answers, and in a way, he had found them. Some things didn't need to be explained with words. Respect, gratitude, trust. These emotions existed in every creature, even those as wild as the tiger. He smiled, knowing he had done the right thing, and as he made his way back to his campsite, he felt a peace he had never known before. As Raj walked back to his campsite, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment. He had come into the jungle expecting just another research trip, but he was leaving with something far more valuable. A story, an experience, a connection that few would ever understand. He had witnessed the raw power of nature, the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, and the silent trust that had formed between himself and a wild tiger. It was something he would carry with him forever. He reached his campsite just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sitting down near his fire, he let out a deep breath. His work was far from over. There were still dangers lurking: poachers, deforestation, the constant threats that wildlife faced every day. He knew he couldn't change everything, but he could do his part. As he ate a simple meal, his mind drifted back to the moment the tiger had looked at him before disappearing into the jungle. It was a moment he would never forget. He had always believed in the importance of protecting wildlife, but now it was personal. He made a silent vow to dedicate even more of his life to conservation. The jungle had given him a gift, not just in the form of an experience, but in the form of a renewed purpose. He would fight harder, speak louder, and do everything in his power to ensure that creatures like that mother tiger and her cub had a future. He looked up at the darkening sky, the stars beginning to twinkle above. Somewhere out there, deep in the jungle, they were safe, and that was enough. Days passed and Raj finally packed up his campsite, ready to return to civilization. As he took one last look at the vast jungle stretching before him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not many people got to witness what he had seen. He had stepped into the world of the wild and had been accepted, even if just for a moment. With one last glance at the trees, he turned and walked away, knowing he would return one day. The jungle had a way of calling people back, and he knew that this was not the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. Raj had saved a tiger cub, but in return, he had gained something far greater, an understanding of nature's silent language. Sometimes trust doesn't need words, and respect can exist even between the wild and the human world. Nature is a delicate balance, and every creature plays its part. It is our duty to protect and respect the wildlife that shares this planet with us. Small acts of kindness, like Raj's, can make a difference. Let us learn to live in harmony with nature and cherish the beauty of the wild.